Welcome back. Well, the jump in the number of desertions has seen scores of soldiers courts-martialed. Yet, of the more than 3,000 who deserted during 2006, only 174 troops were actually charged. The Army does little to pursue or prosecute deserters in most cases, the Pentagon just entering their names into an FBI national criminal database, and some deserters even allowed to return to their units. But the majority face dishonourable discharge from the military. Our guest still with us from Vancouver, Canada, Brad McCall, a U.S. Army private who's currently living, as he puts it, in exile in that country, actually run away from the U.S. Army. In Washington, D.C., Jack BURKMAN, a Republican strategist and political consultant who's described Mr. McCall on this programme as a bum for doing what he's done. And also in Washington, D.C., Josh Rushing, Al Jazeera's military analyst. Jack BURKMAN, let me come to you first of all. You've said there are people you know who've been badly wounded, who are desperate to go out and rejoin the fight. Yes. You've described Mr. McCall in those disparaging terms. You still look like a relatively young man today. Why didn't you quit the lobbying circle in Washington, D.C. and go down to the recruiting office?
Well, it's a fair question. It's not a relevant question. We don't have conscription in the United States. Everyone in the military is there because they choose to be there. You sign a contract with the United States of America, you make a commitment, and that's it. No one who doesn't choose to be there doesn't have to be there. I frankly feel much of my work with wounded soldiers has helped the military, and I'm very proud of that. So I don't know that, and I think maybe I'm probably a little too old to be of much use to the military anyway. But I think we really have to, what we have to do, David, is improve extradition. I mean, this character we have in Vancouver, I'm sure there are many others like him. We have to work with the Canadian government to get these people into custody. In this gentleman's case, I can promise him my office will be working with the Premier's office in British Columbia, with local officials in Vancouver. We're going to do everything we can to put them in touch with U.S. Justice Department officials and with DOD officials, and hopefully, U.S. authorities will succeed in getting him into custody and getting him 20 to life, which is about what you get and what you deserve for this kind of crime. You just can't tolerate this stuff.
Is that pour encourager les autres, as they say, just to set an example to those who might be thinking of doing the same?
Well, sure, absolutely. You have to have, yes, that's exactly what it's about. That's exactly what punishing deserters is about. If you let everybody, the military, in any conflict, you have deserters, you have people claiming they want to go into exile, you have conscientious objectors. In this war, we have a lot of people who are just claiming some kind of insanity. That's the new one. They want to claim they have emotional problems. You have to crack down on this stuff, or you can't fight a war and you can't have an army. That's just the way it is.
I was reading the story just before I came on air of a sergeant about 3 years ago in Iraq who saw a man blown in half, couldn't then do his job after that and was charged with cowardice. It left me speechless too.
It's hard to know. I mean, you have to see the facts of you'd have to see the facts of each individual case. I mean, I think what we have to be careful about, you have to be careful about drawing conclusions that are too broad from these limited, possibly anomalous incidents. I mean, we're looking at isolated incidents. You're talking to this guy in Canada. We might talk to 3 or 4 people and somehow conclude that there's a lot of desertion and problems in the U.S. Army. I don't think there is. Like I say, I think from my experience, and it's vast and broad in terms of representing the defense industry.
Let Brad McCall have his say.
Yeah. You're saying there are no problems, or there aren't as many problems as you think there are in the U.S. Army, or as I think there are in the U.S. Army. Well, I've been there, my friend, and I know for a fact there's heavy drug use, there's stress problems, there's tons of things going on in the U.S. Army right now, disciplinary problems. I left my unit 2 weeks after I left my unit. In the 2 weeks after I was gone, there were 7 events that happened. There was a guy who stole a car. There was a guy who got alcohol poisoning. There were guys who tested hot for drugs. There were guys who went AWOL. And you're telling me there are no problems in the U.S. Army, or there aren't as many problems in the U.S. Army as we think there are?
These problems go with war. The reason you didn't hear so much about them in Vietnam or in Korea is we didn't have 24/7 cable news. All the problems you're describing you had in the Civil War, you had in the Revolutionary War, you had in the Second World War, but you didn't have Fox News and MSNBC and CNN with 200 reporters over there bringing it all home. That's the difference. This is war. There's nothing new under the sun. This has gone on for 5,000 years.
Okay, Josh Rushing, according to an Army spokeswoman, Elizabeth Robbins, she says opposition to the war prompts only a small proportion of the desertions that we see. Do you think that's a fact?
I think that is a fact. I think it's more about them signing up for something and then getting there and not realizing what they've done or having second thoughts. Dave, I'd like to take the chance to actually respond to a couple of things that both of your guests have said. The problem with Mike's story up from Vancouver is he presents the issue as if his only choices were to go to Iraq and commit war crimes or to go to Canada. And that's not the case. If he's so appalled by the stories he heard from his fellow soldiers, he's exactly the kind of soldier that should go to Iraq. One, because he won't conduct himself in that way, and two, he can object and stop those kind of things if he sees them. The second problem is, if he doesn't want to go, if he thinks he can't go, then he needs to stay, and he needs to tell his commander no, and he needs to face the charges because he signed the contract, and that's what Lieutenant Watada has done. And in doing that, it brings certain legal issues up for debate in America, but by leaving, you can't have the case anymore. So a couple problems there. With your
Josh,
other,
I'm going to stop you just there
guest.
because while that's still fresh, let's
Okay.
ask Brad McCall about it. You should have fought it from the inside rather than going away and shouting about it from the outside.
So I should have gone to Iraq and been a possible danger to my fellow soldiers because I wouldn't be able to pull a trigger against a Iraqi civilian driving a car into a checkpoint, or be sent to prison because I refused to pull a trigger in a war that I deemed to be illegal and immoral.
Well, the point is that you shouldn't have joined the army in the first place if you weren't prepared to fire a gun.
No. Right, yeah, well, when I signed up, I had no problem. I had no problem pulling the trigger.
Our friend, I think, is confused. He thinks he's a member of Congress with the right to vote on whether the U.S. goes to war. He's a private in the Army. I think he's suffering from delusions of grandeur. He thinks he's a U.S. Senator. I think he's confusing these roles.
Wait. Am I not a human being just because I'm a young guy who grew up in a regular old household and I'm not some rich guy on Capitol Hill? Does that mean that I have no morals?
You want my honest answer to that?
Does that mean I don't have a chance to stand up? Yeah. Give me your honest answer.
You want me to tell you what I really think? My honest answer is when you do what you did, let me tell you something. When you do what you did, pal, you're subhuman. You lose your rights at the table of the brotherhood of man, and you don't even deserve to be thought of as a human being. No, no, and no.
So I'm an animal now.
Okay, let's leave
You are.
personal abuse out of this. It really has no part in an intelligent discussion. Go back to Josh Rushing, our military affairs analyst in Washington, D.C. You wanted to make some other points too, Josh.
I did. One of the points about Mr. McConnell is that he says the war's illegal, but he joined the Army 3 years after the war began. So I don't know what was illegal about it in '06. It wasn't illegal, for the 3 previous years before that. For our guest in Washington, D.C., the Republican lobbyist, I think the Army will actually take you until you're 47 years old now. You speak so strongly about it. I don't think until you put yourself in that position can you really say some of the things that you're saying.
Okay, I think that's foolish. This man, there's no basis for saying that at all. We don't have conscription. The only way that argument would hold any water is if we had conscription in the United States. It's a choice. You make a choice, you live with it. You have no right to tell me.
Okay, let me intervene at this point because I was going to ask about the draft. Jack Burkman, is there a possibility, because it's very difficult to recruit people at the moment, is there a possibility that people could be conscripted?
I don't think so in the U.S. because we could draw down troops. Before it came to that, if we do have to be there another 3 or 4 years, which I think frankly is likely, we can take more troops out of Europe, more troops out of Asia, and we have more troops here, and there's still more National Guard troops to draw down upon, even though the U.S. media may lead you to believe otherwise. But responding to what your other guest, what your military analyst said, those arguments hold no water. We don't have conscription in the U.S. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a U.S. citizen. I have every right to offer commentary on our soldiers and our military. Just because I'm not in the service, that doesn't mean I don't have a right to comment on our soldiers. I pay their salaries. I'm a taxpayer. In the United States, I have every right to do that.
Okay, now, Josh Rushing, you want to say something?
Sure, you have a right to volunteer for the service that you speak so highly of as well. About the conscription question is that the U.S. has never fought such a prolonged war without the support of a draft. The problem is, if the government were to institute a draft, it would galvanize the resistance against the war. So they're stuck in between a rock and the hard place where they need more people, but they can't institute the draft because of the political cost. And when I say the Army can't continue doing what it's doing, it's not the media leading that on, it's the Army. Listen to what the Chief of the Army is saying about the strain on the troops and the strain on the units.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. I think we're going to have to leave the discussion roundabout there. To Brad McCall, who's run away from the U.S. Army, currently living in Canada, waiting to decide or to find out what your fate might be. Also to Jack Burkman, thank you very much indeed. And if the two of you ever meet with Mr. Burkman saying you're going to push for 20 years to life for our Canadian friend, well, perhaps it'll be an interesting encounter. And also, many thanks to Josh Rushing, Al Jazeera's military affairs analyst, also in Washington, D.C. And thank you for watching this edition of Inside Story. From all the team, goodbye.